As part of our efforts to promote and conduct free, fair, credible, transparent elections and peaceful elections in Ghana, the EC has come to the conclusion that it is time for in our nation's development to compile a new voters' register. The reasons are twofold. On assumption of office in 2018, in the last quarter, the Electoral Commission was confronted with a notification for the award of a contract for the upgrade of our existing biometric voter management system. The award of contract was signed, and it was for the amount of $56 million. And it was for upgrading the existing kits, that is the biometric voter registration kits, and then the verification devices. It was also aimed at upgrading and refurbishing our existing data center, and it was for an amount of $56 million. Indeed, on assumption of office, that notification for the award of contract was before us. It had been signed, and it was before us. And there was enormous pressure on us to get it going. Pressure from our vendors at the time, the Supertech Lock Limited, and then the Special Budget Committee of Parliament. There was concern that we had barely 3 months to go to the referendum, and the system that we had was not robust enough to support us. Indeed, our vendors told us on many occasions that if we did not go ahead to sign the contract and make good that contract, we risked having a system breakdown. They were of the view that the data center as it stood could not carry us forward. I'm pleased to note that the Commission did not make good that contract, because that contract was merely to take us through to the referendum, to enable us to conduct the 2018 referendum and the limited registration for 2019. It was not a system being built to carry the Commission forward for another 5, 6, 10 years. It was merely to sustain us and to enable us carry out the referendum of 2018, the limited registration, not even the district level election, but the limited registration of 2019. The Commission felt that, it had just come in and we needed time to, to think and to do our own independent assessment of the systems. As such, we put on hold that notification and expressed the view that we wanted to do an independent audit of the system to find out if indeed those systems were obsolete, if the systems could not be used, and if it would crash. We then invited the biometric consultant who had advised the EC when the decision was taken to go biometric in 2011. And he came and spent some 2 weeks with us. But just as a way of information, the EC decided that, it was not prudent to go with a single vendor. The situation we found ourselves in was that we were in a situation that we call vendor lock-in. We were not, we did not control the systems. The systems were controlled by the vendor, and the vendor was in charge of the data center. The vendor was in charge of the software, and the vendor was in charge of the hardware as well. And we felt that it was not prudent to have one vendor controlling all. So what we did was to open up the process and split up the solutions and into 3 parts. So you have the data center, you have the software, and you have the hardware, so that you do not have one organization managing all 3. And these competitive tender processes and proposals were put in the dailies on a number of occasions. I believe that there were about 2 to 3 advertisements, inviting vendors to bid for this process. How does it link? If you're going to buy a new system, buy it. What has it got to do with compiling a voters register? And a lot of people have raised that question as we went along, that go ahead and buy the system. It shouldn't have anything but leave the register as it is. And the answer has been very simple. Our experts advised us right from the onset that in acquiring the new system, you would be changing the system operating the biometric voter management system. And it meant that you had to migrate the data. you had to migrate the data from the old system to the new system. The result was that you could risk, and we did stand to risk losing a lot of data of citizens who had registered. The result would be that you would go on registration, you go on voting day, and your names were missing from the register. And this was not a risk that we wanted to take, because it meant that several people, and you could not tell who, but as you migrated from the old system onto the new system, you risk losing a lot of data. And I can imagine the fury and the uproar that would go on in this country if people go to the on voting day to vote and their names were not captured. In their view, this was a big risk, and we felt that we didn't want to go forward with this risk. In their view also, the quality of the fingerprints raised issues. The capture of the fingerprints was poorly done in several instances. And even as you migrated, you risk losing even the images, the quality of the images, even as you migrated. And the result was that you would end up with a high incidence of manual verification, which we have come to observe. And I mean, because the fingerprints quality is so low, when you go on election day and you are trying to verify, you realize that your fingerprints cannot be captured. We cannot verify you using your unique identity, which is your fingerprints. What happens then is that, well, you come with a card and we allow you to vote. This could lead to manipulation, in the sense that the card may not belong to you, and because we don't have the feature for facial recognition, you could come in with a card and you're allowed to vote. And anybody, if there's collusion at that level, at the polling station level, it could lead to a high incidence of manual verification. Indeed, it was something we were beginning to witness. And if you look at even the 2019 district level election, of the 5,400, a little over 5,400 persons who were verified to vote, 35,000 of them were manually verified. And that's a significant number. If you come to look at the fact that in 2008, the difference between the winner and the runner-up was less than 40,000. And here we are only talking about 5.4 million people, and 35,000 were manually verified. But if you look at the situation in 2012, the difference between the winner and the runner-up, it was less than 40,000. So this is significant, and these are risks. If we really want to ensure the credibility of our elections and ensure that the will of the people really stands, then these are issues of concern that we should look at. And so the main reason, as I have mentioned, for our decision was that changing the operating system, migrating the old data to the new data, you were going to risk losing a lot of data. Secondly, the fingerprints capture was poorly done, and it meant that it would even lose its quality. And in the end, you have a register, a biometric register, where the fingerprints that you have becomes useless, and a lot more people will be manually verified. The Commission felt that it was important that its foundation document, that is the voters' register, was credible and robust. And these are some of the reasons that we chose to compile, the register. The second reason is that the register lacks credibility. It is bloated. We have a number of dead persons on the register, and we have not been effectively able to clean this. Under this new system, we are working out modalities to be able to expunge the names of the dead from the register periodically. But we also have the issue of foreign nationals on our register. And the Supreme Court recognized this in 2014, 2015, when it ordered the Commission to expunge the names of persons who had used the National Health Insurance Card to register. The Supreme Court felt that the National Health Insurance Card did not ensure strict proof of a person's citizenship, and therefore anybody resident in the country could acquire a card. That was allowed, persons were allowed, people who had the National Insurance Card were allowed to register, and they all ended up on our voters' register. It meant that we had foreigners also, and people who were not eligible to be registered as voters on our register. The Commission took steps to do this, We must note, however, that the time given to the commission was very, very short. It was close to the election, and it meant that we had to go around the country to collect the source documents, that is the Form 1A, that had been used to capture, the details of persons. What the commission realized or recognized was that the Form 1A, unfortunately, many of the officers who registered these persons did not capture the source documents that they used. So you have to either use your passport or your driver's license or the NHIA card. But most of them did not capture the source document that was used. So in effect, the process and the exercise was not very thorough. Apart from that, it was difficult to obtain the source documents that were used in many places. In a nutshell, the commission was able to trace a little over 57,000 of such people and invited them for re-registration. Of that number, some 29,000 came forward for re-registration. This means that we still have some 26,000 people who still have the old card in their possession. But the key thing is that quite a number, we were not able to do this successfully because this was registration that was done as far back as 2012 and so on. And it was difficult to go through the archives and bring out the source document. And it was a manual process. And so, these are some of the reasons why we took the decision, apart from the main issue of the losing the biometric data. These are some of the reasons that we felt that, let's have a clean process. Indeed, Justice VCRAC Crabb, in his report on page 14, also noted that our register contained about 580,000 dead persons. Per his calculations, this number, was constituted about 4% of the eligible voters on our register. What we have, we've looked at the statistics, and today that number has gone up to close to 1 million. So we have about 1 million dead people from 2016, when Justice Crabb said there were 580,000 dead people on the register, causing it to be bloated. And he said that number constituted 4%, of the eligible voters on the register at the time. Today, this number has risen to some 1 million in total. And the margin, the margin of error, Justice Crabb noted that that margin was 2 times the margin by which most presidential elections had been won. It was 2 times, I think the figure, I believe that margin and the figure of 580,000 in his view was 2 times the margin by which most presidential elections had been won prior to 2016. This was a report that had been prepared in 2016. I just want to, put it out that as a commission, our desire is to ensure that it is only those who qualify to vote who vote. And it is our desire that we leave no room for manipulation at the polling station. Because under the current situation, any manipulation there could have dire consequences for our election, in the sense that it could change the outcome of an election. Assuming that in every polling station you have a bloat and there's collusion and polling agents turn a blind eye and people are allowed to manually verify. What could happen is that, assuming that you decide that 10 people you verify 10 people manually, and these people do not exist by 10 because it's bloated anyway, so there will not be the issue of overvoting. It means that if you multiply 10 by your 33,000 polling stations, you are going into close to 350,000 people, and that is enough to change the outcome of an election. And these are some of the reasons that informed our decision to compile a new register. We recognize that in particularly the rural areas, the rural parts of Ghana, you find that people who are used to manual and communal labor may have lost the use of their fingerprints. And you know, the whole essence, we should lay aside the biometric if we cannot implement it to the letter. And therefore, the whole essence is to introduce the facial feature, so that if you go and your fingerprints, you know, cannot be verified, or you have lost the use of your fingerprints, at least you can be verified using your facial features. And so there's some credibility. And I think that it is in the interest of the parties. They should be happy that nobody should be able to manipulate the system. And that's basically what we are trying to do, to introduce some and tighten the system, tighten the screws, and introduce some credibility, further credibility into our system and into the register. And that's why we are doing what we are doing. But to say that, you know, the register is changed only after 10 years, it is not so. Our research and the evidence shows that registers of the past have been changed, you know, in the 8th year, after basically running 2 elections and two general elections and 2 district level elections.